It was a Tuesday night, late enough that the grocery store felt half asleep. I was sitting in my car with the engine running. That quiet hum you barely notice, like staring at a receipt folded in half on my lap. Nothing on it looked dramatic. Paper towels, a rotisserie chicken, sparkling water I didn't plan on grabbing, but somehow ended up in the cart anyway. No big number jumped out. No moment where I thought, wow, that was dumb. It just felt like a normal stop on the way home. And that's what stuck with me. I couldn't remember making any real decisions in there. It felt less like spending and more like gravity. Like these things just happened to me while I pushed a cart around. I drove home trying to remember what I'd actually bought, and it was weird how fuzzy it already felt. Like the money had left without leaving a mark. After that, I started noticing how often I describe things as just part of the week. Just gas, just coffee, just grabbing lunch because the morning went sideways and suddenly it's 1 o'clock. None of it feels optional in the moment. It feels pre-approved, like it was already baked into the day before I even woke up. What's strange is how little attention I give those charges compared to bigger ones. I'll spend weeks thinking about a phone upgrade, reading reviews, watching videos, convincing myself, but I'll swipe through 10, 15 small charges in a day without feeling anything at all. I tell myself it's because I'm busy or tired, or that it's not worth the mental energy. Somewhere along the way, being worn down became a permission slip. If the day takes enough out of you, the spending barely even registers as spending. It just feels like part of getting through it. I used to tell myself I didn't really do upgrades. I wasn't buying luxury versions of things. I wasn't splurging. I was just choosing the slightly better option. The medium instead of the small. The seat with a little more legroom. The product that was $5 more because it seemed like the sensible choice. It never felt indulgent. It felt responsible even. But what I didn't notice at the time was how often I was doing it. Every one of those moments felt isolated, harmless on its own. I never thought of it as a habit. I thought of it as good judgment. It wasn't until much later that I realized I had quietly built a lifestyle around always rounding up. I wasn't reckless, but I also wasn't honest. I liked the version of myself who didn't splurge, even as I kept paying extra to feel a little less uncomfortable in small, forgettable moments. Food delivery was another one that didn't feel like spending. It felt like relief. A long day ends. The fridge looks unconvincing, and suddenly tapping a screen feels like the most reasonable thing in the world. I told myself it was about time, not money. That I was buying back an hour, or at least buying back some energy. The numbers never felt real because the food disappeared so fast. $25 here, $32 there. It didn't feel like anything was adding up. It just felt like dinner. But when I finally looked back at a month and saw how often those charges showed up, it felt strange. Not shocking, just heavy. Like realizing you've been carrying something for a while without noticing the weight. I couldn't remember most of the meals. I just remembered being tired. Subscriptions are sneaky because they start with optimism, a free trial, a promise to cancel later, something I tell myself I'll definitely use. Once they're running, they fade into the background. They don't interrupt my day. They don't ask permission. They just exist. Every month, a small charge slides by, quiet and polite. What started bothering me wasn't the amount. It was the reason. So many of them existed to solve tiny annoyances. Ads, waiting, limited access, mild boredom. I realized I was paying a monthly fee to avoid feeling slightly irritated. And that felt uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite explain. Comfort had turned into a subscription model, and I didn't remember agreeing to it long term. I had this one habit that felt almost too small to count. Coffee on the way to work. $4 and some change. Sometimes more. It felt ridiculous to even think about it. $4 isn't a problem. $4 doesn't change your life. But one morning, standing there half awake, I did the math out loud in my head. $4, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, right around $1,000. That number landed harder than I expected. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I had never once felt like I spent $1,000 on coffee. I felt like I spent $4 over and over again. And somehow that made it worse. The money didn't feel real until it was already gone. A lot of my spending hides inside other people's plans. Someone suggests dinner, someone else books a trip, something's already happening, and I just go along with it. I don't feel like I chose it. I feel like I participated. That's the dangerous part. The money doesn't feel connected to me because I didn't initiate the moment, but the charges still show up the same. After a weekend like that, I'd open my banking app and feel this quiet confusion. Like, how did that much leave? Nothing wild happened. Nothing went wrong. It was just a good time. And that's when it hit me that belonging is expensive in a way that never feels dramatic. It just feels normal until it doesn't. Fees used to bother me. Delivery fees, service fees, convenience fees. At some point, they stopped. They became part of the price, not something separate. I stopped reading them. I stopped questioning them. If the total felt acceptable, I moved on. What I didn't notice was how often I was paying extra simply to keep things smooth. No friction, no waiting, no inconvenience. The weird part is how invisible that choice became. I wasn't deciding anything anymore. I was just accepting it. And there's something unsettling about realizing how easily I trade awareness for ease. Especially when the trade happens so often, it stops feeling like a trade at all. There was a stretch where I told myself I earned enough now that I didn't need to watch every dollar. It felt like a milestone, like I had graduated from worrying. That thought was comforting, and I held on to it longer than I should have. What I didn't see was how enough kept quietly moving. As my income went up, my attention went down. The spending didn't make me happier, but it did make me less aware. And somehow the anxiety never fully left. It just changed shape. I stopped worrying about individual purchases and started feeling this low-level tension instead, like something wasn't adding up, even if I couldn't point to what. Credit cards made everything feel cleaner. Too clean. No cash leaving my hand. No pause. Just a tap and a beep and it's done. I liked how smooth it felt. What I didn't like, once I noticed it, was how little I felt anything at all. The loss was delayed. The weight showed up weeks later, bundled together, harder to trace back to a feeling or a moment. It wasn't painful enough to stop me. It wasn't clear enough to learn from. It just hovered. I started realizing that when pain is delayed, it doesn't disappear. It just becomes harder to understand. Gas stations are dangerous in a boring way. I'd go in for one thing and come out with three. A drink, a snack, something I didn't plan on. Each item felt cheap enough to ignore, but it happened so often it started to feel automatic. My hands knew what to grab before my brain got involved. That's what bothered me. The routine, the lack of thought. I wasn't choosing anymore. I was just repeating. And repetition is expensive when no one's paying attention. The first time I really looked at a full month, I didn't feel panic. I felt something quieter. Disappointment, maybe. Not in the numbers themselves, but in how predictable they were. Nothing surprising stood out. It was patterns. The same charges over and over again. That was the part I didn't want to look at first. Patterns are harder to blame on circumstances. They point back at you. Sitting there, scrolling through it all, I realized how much of my spending wasn't about emergencies or joy. It was just maintenance, keeping things feeling normal. Entertainment spending felt harmless because it was supposed to be fun. Streaming services, rentals, games I meant to play. It didn't feel responsible to question that, but when I paid attention, I noticed how much of it went unused. Things I liked the idea of more than the experience. I was paying for future enjoyment that never quite showed up. That gap between intention and reality felt heavier than the dollars themselves. It wasn't waste in a dramatic sense. It was quieter than that. It was paying for versions of myself I didn't have the energy to be. Then there were the small replacements. Chargers, cables, random fixes. Things I bought again because I lost them or ignored them the first time. Each one felt minor, necessary even. But taken together, it started to feel like I was paying a tax for not paying attention. Maintenance always felt optional until it wasn't. And I kept choosing later over now, without realizing later cost more. Lunches during busy weeks added up faster than I expected. Not because they were expensive, but because they were frequent. Food turned into fuel, not something I remembered. When I finally added it up, I didn't feel guilty. I felt surprised. That money could have been something else. I just never stopped long enough to let it be. The trade-off happened without me being present for it. I noticed how often I paid extra to avoid small discomforts. Lines, waiting, decisions. It felt like buying peace. And for a moment, it worked. but the peace never lasted as long as the charge. I was still tired, still distracted, still vaguely uneasy. That's when I started wondering what I was actually paying for and why it never seemed to stick. Normal got expensive without asking permission. Things I once considered optional became baseline. Faster shipping, better seats, nicer versions. The floor kept rising and I kept stepping up without questioning it. At some point, I stopped asking whether something was worth it and started asking whether it was normal. And normal, it turns out, is a moving target with a monthly bill. There was another number that stuck with me. $10 a day and little extras, nothing dramatic, just here and there. When I did the math, it came out to about $300 a month, over $3,000 a year. What bothered me wasn't the number. It was realizing nothing in my life felt $3,000 better because of it. The money was gone, but the feeling never arrived. My first instinct was to fix it, to optimize, to cut things out, but I didn't. I just sat with it. The discomfort, the awareness, noticing how much of my money left without a story attached to it. That pause felt important. Awareness didn't immediately change my behavior, but it did change the way I talked to myself about it. And that felt like something, even if it wasn't clean or satisfying. I still think about that grocery store parking lot sometimes. Sitting in the car, receipt folded, dashboard lights glowing softly. From the outside, it looks like nothing. Just a normal moment in a normal life. But there are so many moments like that. Little exits, little charges, little decisions that don't feel like decisions at all. And I keep wondering how much of my life is paid for in ways I barely remember. How much of it slips by so quietly. It's strange. The most expensive spending I do almost never feels like spending. It just feels like Tuesday night.